Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Turbo, a Power Rangers movie. And I know this is like eventually because I'll have this in the Mighty and in the Power Rangers like reviews, and this is probably going to be out of order just because I haven't finished Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. I haven't gone into Zeo yet. But I'm just gonna review this anyways, just because I can, just because I have overall knowledge of Power Rangers stuff. Um, I've seen probably every single Power Rangers movie, and this is the last one until eventually they do another thing. Here's my thing, though. I think probably a lot of people would probably openly say that like Power Rangers Turbo is probably not uh like if anybody was to desperately want to be a Power Ranger and be in a certain Power Ranger season, probably no one would probably pick Power Rangers Turbo. Like, a lot of people would be like, dude, I want to be in Mighty Morphin. I want to be like I want to be Jason's character. I want to be Billy's character. I want to be Zach's character, or so on and so forth. No one would probably pick Power Rangers Turbo because eventually, like, they lose Zordon in this whole entire season, and like Tommy leaves, and like I think eventually like Adam leaves, and like all the good ones kind of leave, and so like it just like goes on to just have forcibly them like shifting into different characters in this show, because I guess everybody after they made their Turbo movie money, they're like, dude, I'm freaking deuce, I'm out. So you have a lot of drastic shifting and transitions in this show franchise after Turbo was this movie was to happen, because a lot of people are just like, I got my movie money, I'm gonna get out of here. So I would say honestly, this movie compared to the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, they got really smart about the Megazord part. Even though the Megazord part wasn't long enough in this movie, as well as any number of things. Like, they don't even have their mission to get their powers in this movie. It's just basically just like, the command center will open up and just, F it, here you go. Like, here's your powers. Here's your powers in this movie. Like, I think we spend way too much time on the villains in this movie compared to the Power Rangers themselves. Like, really bizarrely, like, we have, like, the villains that have to have their own like reason for like why like they're doing their mission, and they have to get this guy named Larigot or whatever his name is, Larigot, I'm assuming his name. That whole goofy thing, like why didn't the Power Rangers get their powers from Larigot? You have a freaking wizardy guy in this movie, but you don't get his powers from the wizardy guy. I know wizardy guy is not a word. Wizardy is not a word, but I just wanted to keep iterating that word because it sounded funny. Um, we have this pirate ship called the Ghost Galleon. What the is that? Like, Ghost Galleon? I hope that this ship is going to be consistently used. Like, could you just imagine like somebody who had a ship that named their ship Ghost Galleon because of the turbo thing? I would love to meet that person and shake that person's hand if they're still alive. Um, just be like, why did you name your ship after like the ship from like Turbo? Like, did you love that movie so much, or were you just thinking like, man, I just love Power Rangers, and Ghost Galleon was just the one way that I could just, just connect. And I'm like, okay, I guess, but still, like, you should have picked like you should have called your ship the Megazord or something. Would have been cool. Like, if you would have said like the Dragon Zord, or if you would have went if you would have went with da, 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 people would be like, what does da, 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 da mean? I guess it's some weird music combination of something. Uh, but yeah, like, you would also think, I'm gonna have to reposition here. You would also think that these people would have learned from the original movie that if you're going to put something in your film, try to also transition it from movie to show. Like in the original Mighty Morphin uh, Power Rangers movie, we had some pig character that eventually was going to be like side minion of this movie. And bizarrely, like this pig minion character didn't make it to the show. And so we had bizarrely some minions that didn't make it onto the show. Because we had these things called potropods, which were these like lizard-like creatures, and so like, and they're in this spot of the Ghost Galleon scenes, and I'm just like, okay, like, you would have thought if they would have spent money on these creature pod-like things, but I guess those are one-offs, right? Because like, there's very few of them in existence, I'm sure. Uh, like, why wouldn't you have carried that on to the show? Because obviously, I don't think those things were ever used, I guess, in the show. I could be wrong. Uh, but there's always just kind of mistakes that this movie to show franchise thing makes. I don't know. I think that's why they just stopped doing the movies, just because it's like, hey, like the movies aren't good enough, or really, like, everybody just loved Mighty Morphin, and it's a mistake to have gone and try to do other movies, and plus also uh, like we've kind of tired our actors and actresses enough, and plus also all the movies are all the shows are just done in like New Zealand or whatever, and so like, and there were also just kind of very few, like, I think like shoved out there kind of movies that eventually just went nowhere. So with that said, yeah, so let's get into the spoilers of this. Like, I could say that parts of this was just the like, hey man, this is obviously just a transition movie. Like, it feels like such a transitional movie. It just seems just like, man, there's no effort put in this film. uh the thing that they end up doing with Rocky in this thing to eventually just transition to Blue Ranger in this episode, let's just say, yeah, it's just man, just so disappointing. So let's go out of our way to say that it's about that time again to go into spoilers about this movie. So let's go into the coveted double five to say it is spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time we to spoil this movie. So, very beginning of this movie, we have a Star Wars crawl where basically they're to tell us, hey guys, Laragoat, he's this wizard that's from this place that is to eventually have to forcefully decide to go to Earth to contact the Power Rangers because he needs their help. And we have this main villain called Dematox. That's probably not going to work out, right? They're probably not going to have Dematox in the Power Rangers Turbo like show, right? I'm sure they're just going to scrap that whole main villain thing and just go right to some other like weird, bizarre-ish thing, right? No, they went with Dematox. I'm like, no offense to this woman, like, this just seemed like when you have like Mighty Morphin, and I know there's all kinds of random villains in this show, um, I actually liked the Zeo villains. I actually liked the Mighty Morphin villain, even though they seemed very random. Uh, I actually liked everything up until like Turbo, and no offense to the actress who played Dematox, it was just like, man, that just seemed like a random bag of crap. Where like you just have this woman that just has characters that look nothing like her. It's all just a random like barrage of monsters that make no sense. There's no connection to anything. Why is the Piranhatrons like connected to Dematox? How is it that they're all the same? Nothing is just. It's a random bag of stuff that makes no sense. But then again, when looking at it, Rita doesn't look anything like the putties and whatever. It's just like you could make that like comparison where nothing makes sense in the very first original like thing of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. So why should Turbo make any sense? Because it all feels just random and whatever. But like it's the random like at least Mighty Morphin, yeah, it's random, but it works. Where like Turbo, like it's random and it doesn't work. Like and plus they kind of go to the same well with certain characters where of course some of them are like ignorant characters and like yeah, it just doesn't work. Just like it's too random. Plus, it also just like it's a lot of characters that are just take up space. Like Dematox is just another kind of like copy and paste of Rita, and it's like they should have just gone with like either Rita Part Two or something. They should have gone with and plus also they have like Rita in this movie, which was actually kind of fun. They had like Rita and Lord Zed in this movie who had a little cameo. So, anyways, pushing on. So, weirdly, we have Dematox who needs to get to Larigote to have him use his wizard powers to get Dematox to this place called the Island of Misfit Toys. No, um, the Nemesis Triangle. Cause it's not like the Bermuda Triangle. Man, did they freaking lazily like these locations and these names for things are just like somebody really had a real time to think of all these, right? They spent a lot of time just coming up with these goofy freaking names, but they do that with everything. Like it's just everything has to have a goofy name that like doesn't sound cool at all. It's always just like, yeah, what's a demon or what's the villain character name? Ah, Goobly Goop. Oh, great. What's the Red Ranger's like power going to be this season? Oh, he'll just be Red Ranger. Like we don't have to go and like get any complexities or whatever. Like he'll just be Red Ranger. Like oh, so we're not going to call him like Red Falcon Ranger, or we're not going to call him like Red Tyrannosaurus Ranger? No, we're just gonna call him Red Ranger at this point, because freaking who cares? Like what the Zords are? Like just he'll be Red Wild Force Ranger or whatever like season name we have for this one. Um. Anyways, so pushing on. Whew, whew. Sorry. I'm kind of at the tail end of my day. Anyways, so. And that's not a good sign if I'm already getting to top of the spoilers. I'm already yawning. So, probably because this movie did that to me. So, very beginning of this, we have supposedly all the guys who are practicing for their karate tournament. I'm like, okay. Like, some karate tournament that they're supposed to win for some charity, and we have like Rocky who's practicing, and supposedly some guys are telling Rocky it's like, hey man, maybe we're trying too hard, and Rocky's like, hey man, maybe we're not trying hard enough. And so all of a sudden, Rocky ends up coming flying out of the ropes to eventually just hurt his back or to break his back or whatever. So we all of a sudden have all the guys who have to bizarrely, like, it's kind of funny, like, seeing them try to get out of this ring because it looks like very complicated that they're like, they really have, like, it almost feels like they're almost going to fall out of the ring because I think there's too many freaking ropes onto this ring. So Rocky ends up getting hauled away, and so bizarrely we have like Kat who is watching over these all these kids in this bus, and of course we have the one kid that is to be Justin, who is to be the one kid that Kat bizarrely has to like console or something, where it's like, hey Justin, how do you feel? Like how like do you want to talk? Like, man, there's such these weird parts of this movie where like Catherine and Justin are having this alone time, and I'm just like, this seems so weird. Like, as if like Justin, like, hey, like you do realize how young Justin is, right, Cat? Like that just seems so weird to me. Like the whole thing of Turbo, where you have like Justin who's to have these like moments with Kat. Like I get how like this whole Power Rangers team is like a family, and so like really should just try to like talk things out. But anyways, so what ends up happening is Justin is to make his way to Rocky's bedside, and eventually he sneaks underneath uh, Rocky's bed, and so all the Power Rangers end up giving him like balloons and get well cards and all kinds of stuff. They should have brought him a whole entire cake for him to eat because freaking like might as well just say goodbye to those 6-pack abs because freaking you're not going to be on the show anymore because you're going to be donezo after this. So might as well just freaking stock up on like, man, I am going to just tear through my body. I'm not going to need to get in shape at all anymore because I won't have to be camera ready. Unless Rocky's character decided, or Rocky's real guy actually decided to do acting after this, which I wouldn't have. Anyways, going into this, because hey man, freaking have the legacy of being technically the second Red Ranger in American Power Rangers. Anyways, moving on. So, eventually, Zordon is to call up the Power Rangers because eventually, Larigote had teleported his way onto Earth, and with his magical powers, and so now the Power Rangers have to go and retrieve Larigote, to eventually have him just be handed off right into the hands of the villain, anyways. Eventually. So, what ends up happening is Justin is to hear the conversation of the communicator and Zordon and whatever. And so Justin ends up poking his hand out of the table or under the bed of this hospital. And Rocky's like, hey, did you hear all that? And Justin's like, yeah. So it's like, well, you're going to be a Power Ranger then. So, because you're going to be the only one who has the secret of the Power Rangers. And Rocky, I guess, just can't just... He's like, hey, man, like, freaking, I can't do it anymore. Like, I'm not going to be Power Ranger anymore. So, anyways, so both Tommy and Kat go on this mission to go and get Larigote, while I guess Adam and Tanya eventually are to try and create new Zords, because I guess they just don't have the kind of power to go up against Maligor, so they're creating new Zords, I guess, in this thing. Like, too bad we don't have Billy in this thing, but I guess Billy, went off to Aquitar, so, like, we don't have another Billy in our midst. So, what also ends up happening off to the side is, so, Bulk and Skull are to, of course, be, like, the fun, like, good Bulk and Skull that we all know. And so Bulk and Skull are to be, like, these police officers in this one and this one, because they kind of go several iterations of different kinds of things that they do. So Bulk and Skull are to eventually get abducted by Dematox, and so evidently they get their minds wiped to eventually just have bizarre accents. I mean, man, I have a tongue tied. I apologize. And we have like Skull, who's like, my name is Antonio Banderas. It's kind of funny. Anyways, so eventually Dematox finds both Bulk and Skull. And she's like, no, like these aren't going to be the sacrifices. Like, no, I'm not going to use these guys. I'm like, no. So coincidentally, we have both Kimberly and we have Jason who are scuba diving, and so Dematox decides to scoop them up, and I'm like, yeah. And so what ends up happening is Tommy and Kat go and get Larigote, and while they're going on to like be in this horrible desert or horrible rainforest of a place that feels like a desert because it's freaking hot there, and we bizarrely have these little like backpacks that both Kat and Tommy are wearing just for the sequence for whatever freaking reason. But I think we get up to like mostly having these backpacks for whatever reason for this movie. I don't know why. It just seemed really weird, like the whole backpack thing. I'm like, what are they trying to like sell some? Like, why do they try to sell these things? It seems weird. But anyways, so Kat is to have a snake come up behind her, and Tommy is to like, hey, like in the count of 3, just move, and I hope that you don't fall into a like a hillside or whatever, or just fall down this little cliff here. So Tommy is wrestling with this snake. All of a sudden, Kat is to be hanging by this one branch off the side of this cliff, and so she ends up like going and like shifting her wrists bizarrely to change into a Zeo Power Ranger. But here's the thing: we don't get freaking Zeo Power Rangers in this movie, which kind of sucks. Like, hey, smooth transition, but like, I guess they just avoided it weirdly. I don't know why they avoided not doing anything with Zeo in this movie. They just went right into Turbo. I guess they were like, we don't want to confuse people. So Kat goes coincidentally to morph into her Zeo Ranger Pink, and she just splashes into the water, and then just that's done with. So Tommy and Kat regroup, and eventually they go and find Larigote, who is to be mixed in with a couple of chimpanzees. So they take him, and they're like, okay, like it's time to like send him to the command center. And so we have Dematox, who ends up bargaining for Jason and Kimberly's life in exchange for Larigote. And so the Power Rangers are like, well, we gotta do it because it's Jason and it's Kimberly. And Tommy still has the hots for Kimberly, even though he denies it, I'm sure. Because he had that Dear John letter, whenever the heck that was. But anyways, so what ends up happening is they end up giving Larigote, and so the villains decide that they're going to dump these bodies off to the side. Tommy goes and swims after them to find out that they're decoys, they're just mannequins, because these villains are really smart for once. So anyways, what ends up happening is now they have Larigote, and so they're making their way to the Nexus Triangle to eventually have the Power Rangers follow suit with this ghost galleon thing, and with this bizarrish pirate of a ship that eventually weirdly is to get where it's going by having the Power Rangers put their turbo keys into the ship, which just magically just has this thing just go on to the way it's supposed to be, which is going to the Nexus Triangle. So, both Jason and Kimberly decide, because they can't morph, that they decide to go and open up the this little escape thing, because Jason makes the decision that it seems that they are at a certain part of pressure of water where, like, they're 400 feet, I think, supposedly underwater. And so he's like, hey, like, if we can get through the Nexus Triangle, and once we can kind of make it to like 100 feet uh, above water, I think we can swim up and be able to like get out of here. Which I'm like, I'm sorry, like, you're gonna be trapped on an island. Like, freaking Piranatrons or whatever are gonna be like scouring the whole island to eventually find where they are and grab them. But coincidentally, we have these like tiki torch guys that eventually find Kimberly and just drag her all the way back to Demon Talks anyways. So like, they didn't really do much of like, it's like, man, they just gotta like end up freaking with these Hawaiian looking guys with these masks that Kimberly just ends up with Demon Talks anyways. So so pushing on. So eventually what ends up happening is Kimberly and Bulk and Skull eventually make it out of this ship and eventually make it onto the island, but Jason ends up getting stuck because eventually Dematox mentions that they're taking water, and so she ends up bizarrely looking at her telescope to figure out why they're taking in water. Yeah. I don't get it. But weird parts of this movie. So Larragote is to do his magic to send this ship through the Nemesis Triangle. We have the Power Rangers who end up taking out the what are the name again? Putrapods, while Catherine and Justin are having this conversation. Eventually, that leads to Putropod characters being taken down and getting like slapped over the head. Like a kind of fun sequence. It kind of reminds me of the Rock like statue characters that were in the Mighty Morphin film, where like Rocky and Adam are kind of like double teaming those and taking them out. Man, I miss the original Mighty Morphin series when you have like Adam and Rocky teaming up together. God, was that fun. Like certain characters just kind of teaming up together was always that fun kind of thing. They kind of stopped doing that for the most point, and they just kind of just have just people just kicking butt, and that was about it. And it was just like, man, I miss the days when like two characters would just consistently just team up together, and instead of it always just being like everybody for themselves kind of thing, where like individual people have to look good for whatever freaking reason. Anyways, so pushing on. So we have the Power Rangers that now have to go and get all the keys to bizarrely go in the lower deck to put all their keys together in some corner, because you have to do this like all hands in kind of moment where like everybody's gonna be like, yeah. Like, so they put their keys together, and so that's what lets them be into safe passage through this thing. You would have thought that they should have just morphed at that moment, but that's just me, right? Because we were going to morph shortly thereafter anyways. So they make it to the Nexus Triangle. Villains, heroes, everybody, they shift into their turbos and all kinds of things. So Dematox goes and shoves both Jason and Kimberly into this smoking hot lava, and you would think they would be dead forever, right? They'd be sacrificed, and they'd be dead, and And they're like, yay, like, freaking, we're never going to see Jason come back into the show again. Even though he was always kind of a cool, nice guy. And Kimberly was always just the nicest of probably every single one of the Power Rangers, with the exclusion of probably any of the other Power Rangers that have been severely nice, which I don't even know. But anyway, I'm having jokes here. So, like, we have eventually both Jason and Kimberly who end up getting shot out of the hole of lava, and they are to be the minions of Maligor. Maligor? Good man. Like, Maligor actually sounds like a sweet villain name. Like, why didn't Maligor be a freaking, like, the main villain of this show? Like, I would have been fine with that. Freaking Maligor, you had this lava character. Why couldn't they have had that through the whole show? Like, just have him be the main character. I don't give a about Dematox. Like, Maligor. Sounds cool, right? So we have Kimberly and we have Jason as the Power Rangers are now shifted into Turbo, and like, Justin is pulling off this Shazam-like moment because he's a kid who's a man who is to, and also, like, I think I spotted the guy who plays Justin, his photo where he's to be in front of the command center in his, like, turbo gear, which is freaking sweet. Just sweet, right? Sweet bamps. So cool for him that he, like, is like, yeah, I am the Blue Ranger from Power Rangers Turbo, and I'm gonna let that freaking, like, but it ain't cool, right? So, anyways, pushing on. So, Justin eventually finds where this little place that they're eventually doing this whole, like, ceremony in, and so they end up going and fighting both Jason and Kimberly, and then Lara Goat ends up using his power to try to change Kimberly good, but they don't quite. They take a little bit longer to go and transform Jason back to where he was. And we also have Jason, who sounds even, like, if he didn't sound, like, very yelly in the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers one, now he has these, like, dark grunts where he's like, oh, like, he sounds like a freaking dinosaur. Like, I thought that was kind of funny. Anyways, so, but man, like, those lines that were delivered between Jason and Kimberly were actually pretty sweet, right? Where, like, Kimberly would be like, "Pink is out," and she'd be like, kick her in the freaking, like, those were pretty sweet. Man, if only we could have had a lot more shows where we could have twisted and turned freaking Power Rangers to make them villain against. Instead of the Sixth Ranger, like, I always hated that, where I'm like, wouldn't it be cool if you had a show where the Sixth Ranger doesn't have to be the villain of the show? Like, wouldn't it be cool if all of a sudden you would just have this drastic shift where, like, all of a sudden, bizarrely, like, the Red Ranger all of a sudden just became the villain? Like, in the one Zeo episode where, like, Tommy ended up getting brainwashed and fought, I think, Jason, the Gold Ranger. Man, would that have been sweet if that would have just been, like, the thing of the story, where all of a sudden, like, somebody turns evil and then he becomes evil, like, for the rest of the show, and then you're like, oh my god, like, how is it? And then maybe they would have to have come forcibly with a new Red Ranger temporarily, kind of like they did in Samurai, where they had all of a sudden a female Red Ranger, like, temporarily, until, like, eventually Jaden or whoever came back into the fold. Anyways, so, but getting back to this, so Larigot transforms both Jason and Kimberly back to normal, in perfect time. And so now Dematox is to now go and sacrifice her stupid minion people that she has. Like, man, if she would have just thrown Rygot and Elgar both in there, like, I don't think neither one of those would have been missed. They would have killed both of those characters off. I would have been completely fine, because maybe we would have gotten a lot better like side villains in this show. Because good God, these side villains, like, I hated them. They just felt like carbon copies of uh, Rito and Goldar, like blatant copies. Like, obviously, right? Good thinking. So, pushing on here. So, like, but we have that funny spot where Dematox was to call Rita Repulsa to ask, like, how does she get rid of the Power Rangers? And Rita's like, well, I just have one thing to say to you: run! Because you're never going to get rid of them. It's never going to happen. So, but it's kind of that one funny spot. But anyways, pushing on. So, whew. So, how do we get here? Okay. Where are we at? Okay. So Dematox eventually, or Maligor eventually comes from his spot and is to just start wreaking havoc on all the Power Rangers, start knocking them out, which is pretty cool. Dematox goes and is to try to like compliment Maligor. It's like, hey, you look pretty dashing, you know. So Dematox all of a sudden tries to touch the hand of Maligor to get electrified. Then she ends up falling over like a sack of potatoes. So Maligor ends up coming out and like finding all the Power Rangers, and they even try to use their like swords and their bows and their all weird, goofy weapons that all have goofy names that I'm not going to get into. Like, I'm not even going to talk about much of the Zord stuff in this movie either. Like, there was spots that they have to like talk about all their Zords, and like we had the one spot where everybody used their Zords to get out of the ship, while Adam was like watching on. Like, the ship freaking exploded because there was like torpedoes being jotted into the ship, and then like coincidentally all the Power Rangers got into their Zords and they were protected because the power protected them at that moment. So we have the moment where Adam is to get clocked by Maligor, and so bizarrely Adam can't move, and Tommy's like, hey, Adam, move. It's like, I can't move. And Tommy's like, come on, like, you're eating up camera time. And so Adam is to mention to Maligor that it's like, hey, your wife's leaving. So Maligor looks, and Adam's like, I made you look. So we have them kind of like, Tommy's to mention, hey, we're all going to back out of here the way we came and eventually get our Zords ready because we're just going to go up against this thing and hope we can take it out with our Zords. So Maligor becomes skyscraper size. So they're like, okay, let's go and get our Zords together and let's go and just easily and quickly just take this thing down by basically just, as usual, swording up, which basically means getting their mega sword and going and slicing through this thing like they usually do to kill every single monster. But here's the funny thing. We don't actually kill Maligor in this thing. Like, I think we just continue on with this character, like, even in, like, Power Rangers in Space. Like, Maligor still exists. Because I know Maligor has Zordon eventually, I think, in space. Wherever, like, Maligor is to be, like, that's where Zordon is. In space, I believe, from what I remember. Because I think I ended up recently seeing, like, what happened with Zordon. Like, how it kind of led up in space to, like, what happened with Zordon. And bizarrely, I think Maligor is in Power Rangers in Space. Like, I think the very pilot episode, I think Maligor is getting everybody together to have dinner, weirdly enough. Um, and I think that's where we have, like, Andromeda and whatever freaking villain is in that season. That's just. Anyways, so that kind of cues up, like, basically what is to happen for bulk of this movie. The thing that kind of happens afterwards is eventually uh, we have the karate tournament, and Jason is now a part of this karate tournament instead of Rocky. And so, of course, the Power Rangers win the karate tournament. They get that big fat check, the huge check that's about the size of a person. And so, like, hey, man, we did it. Yeah, like, we did it for the charity. Because we're probably going to still pocket some money here also because movie, but charity, right? So, uh, but yeah, that's kind of like the way that the movie plays out is them winning the money for the charity. If any point they're like, there was the one moment where Justin was to like kind of boast about like, man, like if I can only tell my dad that I'm a Power Ranger, man, would he be happy? Like he'd be proud of me. Or man, if I could just tell everybody that I know, basically. And Kat's like, yeah, but you can't tell everybody. It's and Justin's like, I know, uh it's for me to know and them to find out kind of thing. And I'm like, you know what? Like here's the thing that I never understood about Power Rangers. It's like, why do they keep the secret so much so? Like eventually when they got to the later seasons, they just revealed to everybody that, oh, hey man, you're the Red Ranger. Hey, yeah, you're the Blue Ranger. Hey, yeah, you're the blah blah. Like every season at some point just like made it easily known that these people were the Power Rangers. And here's like, but not every single season, but most of them. Like you would think for the seasons that people would know who the Power Rangers are, you would think they would get some kind of freaking perks about that. Like you would think like free yogurt or yo-yos or free what was the one drink for the one season, because it wasn't like they eventually stopped doing the whole juice bar thing. Uh, the yogurts or go-gurts or whatever freaking like whatever they did in freaking Megaforce. Uh, Whatever they did for drinks or whatever in all the other seasons, you would have thought they would be like, hey man, free forever if you're a Power Ranger. But anyways, so yeah, I think I covered most of this movie, but I'm also just kind of backpedaling and rethinking if there was anything that I forgot about. I think everything was covered. Like I didn't talk about God, what is his name? Uh Lara Goat's wife with the child thing. Like I think that feels like a thing that I don't need to talk about because I didn't even want to talk about Lara Goat. Like that thing just sucked. Like to eventually just have this character that I'm like, shouldn't this be where the Power Rangers get their powers from? Like saving Lara Goat, beating down some things, which they didn't do to get the Lara Goat. What a disappointment. What a just misfire that was. Like, they should have had some mission to get their powers in this movie. Like, give me a reason to, like they needed to fight through everything, don't just hand them things in this movie. They gotta fight for everything. They gotta fight for every inch that they get in this film. Like, I guess them walking way too freaking much in the other movie just led them to just decide, well, we're just going to hand them over the powers in this film. I don't know. Plus, they also had that, like, red, green, blue, blue freaking thing in the middle where they were to put their hands in there. Like, I would have played around with that. I would have been like, doo 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 doo. Like, yeah, same thing, right? It's a giant table that looks just like the one little game, the red, green, blue, blue. I don't know what freaking game that was called, but anyways. So But yeah, that's all that I wanted to say, I guess, for this one. I'm gonna get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.